Hello and welcome back to Beyond Phenomenal, where I try and give you the best UFO, UAP information that will keep you up to date and hopefully not waste too much of your time. So let's get right into it. The Canadian government announced a new UAP study, announced through CTV News. I've got that article in the description. I'll read a quote. Known as the Sky Canada Project, the study, being conducted by the Office of the Chief Science Advisor of Canada, is the first known official Canadian UFO research effort in nearly 30 years. According to a February 2023 PowerPoint presentation obtained by ctvnews.ca, the study seeks to understand how UAP reports are handled in Canada and to offer recommendations for improvements if needed. The project plans to collect information this winter and spring before preparing an internal draft report in the fall and a final public report in the winter or spring of 2024. So, not going to see a ton in the near future, but it's kind of interesting to hear more official sources getting serious about this. I'm sure a lot of this has been motivated by the recent Chinese balloon and other shoot-down stuff above the Canadian airspace as well as some of the NASA work. Another interesting thing in the sort of government science arena is a new draft scientific paper that was released. It was a joint effort between Harvard professor Avi Loeb, who's been heading the Galileo project, which is a civilian effort to get data on UAP, and also in conjunction with the director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Sean Kirkpatrick. It's very technical. I kind of looked through it, and there's nothing very interesting, I guess. It's all very jargon-filled. You're not going to find any bombshells, other than the fact that they do openly consider the possibility of some kind of self-replicating probes that might originate from an extraterrestrial type of mothership. And so I think the word is actually mothership in the paper. So it's pretty interesting to see that, yes, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, who's heading the AARO, is in fact open to this type of discussion. And he's also working with very respected members of the scientific community like Avi Loeb. So now we've got the NASA study and this paper that will eventually come out. It shows that we're going to have some interesting coming years, I think, in terms of getting official documents, even if they're not entirely revealing on maybe the overall nature of any UAP cover-up or story that personally I know I'm interested in, and that's always been the gold, I guess, the light at the end of the tunnel of this kind of endeavor. But on to the next news story. I'm blowing through it today. Journalist Christopher Sharp, he writes for the Liberation Times. He released some more updates on just various things about UFOs, UAPs, in an article called Lockheed Martin Challenged on UFO Legacy Programs as Politicians Talk Hearings. So I'll just read some quotes. He references here a Newsmax discussion that's hosted by Rob Schmidt. But the important part is that there's a feature in this discussion from Republican Representative Matt Gaetz. I think that's Gaetz. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. This is its own interview, but it's linked in the Liberation Times article. I'll just read the quote from Representative Matt Gaetz himself. Quote, "I have seen evidence of craft that I am not familiar with any of our allies or adversaries or even our country possessing. I've seen that craft taken by air crews who have gotten quite close to it. And we've got a lot more questions about why this information isn't more broadly available to the American people. If there's stuff flying over our skies and we don't know about it, whether it's Chinese or whether it's unworldly, I think we need a lot more transparency. And we've actually got a group of Congress members together, and we're going to be conducting a lot more investigations and trying to get this information before the public so that we can have a lot more assessment of the threat level and the risk level." So this is pretty huge. I really appreciate his willingness to just go out there and say unworldly. It's a little bit rare that we hear members of Congress be so brazen in their claims. A lot of the times when we hear from the government, it's a little bit, there's that other category, or, maybe it's coming, from... So it just seems, it's good to kind of clear the air and say, okay, well, this is a possibility. And it's also good to hear that, like I said before, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, heading the AARO, also is open and candid about this. So it seems that there's a lot more... And I'll continue reading from the Liberation Times story. This is a good way to summarize it. Quote, however, sources have claimed to Liberation Times that the topic is now beyond critical mass within Congress, with whistleblowers continuing to testify privately, providing key details about alleged legacy programs. Meanwhile, the specific remit, and I'm not exactly sure how to say that, but basically the specific outline of what the White House's UAP interagency group is going to do has yet to be confirmed. Any potential attempts by the group to uncover alleged UAP programs may yield greater success due to the senior authority of the president and the power he holds. That's Christopher Sharp kind of comparing that to AARO, which as a Department of Defense program might not have the same will and authority to go about this. So it's really interesting to hear that, especially the term critical mass. I'm always a little bit, you got to take things at face value and see where that leads you. It does appear from not only from sources, unnamed sources from Christopher Sharp, but also what publicly members of Congress have said is that there really is a change in the type of dialogue that's going on now today. I'll continue to read. There's some couple other, comments from members of Congress, I think, that illuminate the kind of background details. But I also wanted to talk about some information that was posted from the Black Vault, diving into a Tic Tac-like object that was detected by the National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, back in 2021. There's not really much known about this other than that it was kind of like the Tic Tac in terms of its description, and it was under 10 meters in size. But a lot of that information is being denied access from FOIA or other attempts to get that public. But it was detected using NRO's, that's the abbreviation, their sentient system, which is heavily classified. We're not entirely sure what it does, but it's one of those data collecting systems that was mentioned by Christopher Mellon, I believe. He listed a lot of the agencies and the type of information collecting systems that the Department of Defense has within its purview to gain information on UAP data. So we know that the sentient system can detect UAP. And so it's very likely that this probably isn't the only case that the NRO would have, but they probably do have, potentially, over 10 years, who knows. However long this system and systems prior have been running, they probably have UAP data. So Christopher Mellon, of course, would have knowledge about why they would collect this type of data, and that's why he outlined the NRO as a potential agency that would have this type of data, just because he was the former Deputy Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. In other news, in terms of footage that you can actually see, Jeremy Corbell has released new footage of the so-called Baghdad Phantom UAP. I think it got that designation of a UAP by the Air Force, and the video, it's a series, I think, of 6 images, but it's taken by a Reaper drone. So it's very interesting. You can see something very thin, apparently moving very quickly and leaving after images in its wake. We simply just don't know what this is. People, of course, make all types of claims and try to theorize, but really it's just all you can do is look at it and say, well, this is interesting. It's apparently unknown, and we really don't have we really don't have a ton to go off of. But it's always good to see more. We like to see more footage and more videos, even if each one. No one is so far been the smoking gun, and I don't think we ever will get the smoking gun that people think it's going to be, because people are inherently skeptical, and I would say rightly so. There's been a lot of hoaxes over the years, but thankfully, Jeremy Corbell has been very consistent about releasing genuine, unknown footage from our military. In other news, there's a really revealing interview with Ross Coulthart, who was interviewed by Jay from Project Unity. And in this, he claimed that numerous sources have told Ross Coulthart that members of the military, specifically the United States Air Force and the CIA, are kind of pushing back on disclosure. I think his words were, quote, "now is not the time." He doesn't think, of course, that these 3 objects that were referenced by the Chinese balloon incident and the related objects are anomalous. He thinks they are very much prosaic. But he does have... he's heard from someone in Alaska who was there, who says that he saw no evidence of any actual search whatsoever for at least one of the objects. And his source was in the exact area where a search would have taken place. Apparently, Coulthart also claimed that members of Congress were not shown videos of these 3 objects. But at the same time, there have been many members of Congress speaking about, related videos and incidents about UAP in general that defy explanation. But of course, we can't see that footage. I just wanted to bring this up because it shows kind of the murky picture of what we get as the public from these little tidbits that Congress leaves us, and then kind of what other people who are a little more in the know, like journalists, say. And then ultimately we can kind of compare that and see, well, so what do we really know? And what we know so far is not a whole lot, but it does seem like something is really changing. Something is underneath the surface of all these strange contradictions. There is no doubt in my mind, where there is smoke, there is fire. So there's something going on here, and we might not get the full image for, it could be months, it could be years. I'm guessing it could be several, if not many years for this whole picture to really unravel. History would say that that's the case, but I'll focus on another statement from Representative Jim Himes, who's part of the Gang of Eight. These are members of Congress that are briefed on highly sensitive classified programs. He went on Stephen Colbert's show and told the stunned audience that there were indeed cases, referring to UFOs because Colbert was pushing him on that we, quote, we just aren't sure about. And of course, the audience was quiet for a little bit, and then they kind of giggled. But it's interesting because on the 10th of March, he then stated, the same Representative Jim Himes, he stated on the House floor that, quote, for reasons I don't understand, some of our colleagues and many Americans are running around with a theory that somehow buttresses their political legitimacy. He's referring to the lab leak here. Maybe you do that with UFOs. Maybe you want to believe that there are aliens at Roswell, or whatever you want to believe. That is pretty harmless. Ignoring all of the other political context for this, it's curious to see that there are still conflicting statements, particularly from someone who's high-ranking as Representative Jim Himes. Being on the Gang of Eight is a very powerful position in Congress, and so publicly it's confusing when these kind of statements are made, because then you have other people like Marco Rubio, who Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who are very open about this and very concerned, or people like Tim Burchett that'll just say, I openly believe there's a cover-up. It's kind of interesting. Why? What could possibly explain this? Even if you are skeptical about this, which is, I understand, you have to peel back these layers and wonder, okay, there's immediately a cause for, I guess, question, if not concern, about what's going on. So interestingly enough, Representative Himes is not fully convinced, apparently, of a full-blown cover-up, but it looks like the tides are turning on this whole disclosure movement. But I'll continue on with the interview between Ross Coulthart and Jay from Project Unity. They continue to talk about corruption of the national security, military, and government journalist state, I guess. Like referring to the New York Times, the Washington Post, all of the major outlets. It seems Ross Coulthart focused it on their reputation. It seems that these pillars of mainstream journalism are afraid to rock the boat. He wondered why no one had asked questions like, what are the updates on the search efforts? What did you do for these search efforts? What steps were actually taken? Why can't we see footage from the pilots that definitely do exist? Why can't we see the footage? We talked about last week how there are no plans from the Department of Defense to release the footage on those shoot downs from the objects. Why does the intelligence community think that these were hobby or research balloons? They said it, but they didn't necessarily give a good reason for it. And also, why did a spokesman from NORAD initially publish a statement that they already had identified these objects, but didn't provide any further details? And ultimately, that just added more confusion. I know if you're probably listening to this right now, it sounds like, well, what's really going on? If that's what you're wondering and you're kind of taking that away from this episode, that's exactly where I am. That's why I've been a little bit slow to release these episodes, because it's really confusing. We're not getting any clear message whatsoever, but I will stick by what I said. It seems like there's a hell of a lot of smoke, so I'm betting the fire is getting fanned right now. Ross Coulthart also claimed that Eric Davis, key member in this whole UFO UAP cover-up discussion, Eric Davis has given information to Congress, allegedly, and that people are speaking to Congress about, quote, the programs, the the ones that, we are all curious about. Did they really have the Roswell type of crash? And also another interesting comment from Jay. He, of course, is the one who runs Project Unity. He said that the New York Times was interested at one point in breaking a story on the Wilson and Davis memo, along with Ralph Blumenthal and Leslie Kean, who had been writing stories for the New York Times in the past. But apparently the editorial process is what stopped this paper from getting released, or I guess this story from getting broken. And so for my little big picture segment, I wanted to focus on something that really changed my view on the editorial process and the state of journalism, at least at the New York Times. And if what goes for the New York Times, I would say goes for the rest of mainstream journalism. So I wanted to focus on a December 2006 op-ed from some New York contributors that went into details about American-Iranian relations around that 2006 time period. It's titled, "What We Wanted to Tell You About Iran," and I've linked it in the description. So they open with, quote, "Here is the redacted version of a draft op-ed article we wrote for the Times as blacked out by the Central Intelligence Agency's Publication Review Board after the White House intervened in the normal pre-publication review process and demanded substantial deletions. Agency officials told us they had concluded on their own that the original draft included no classified material, but they had to bow to the White House." That, to me, was very interesting. They ended the article by saying, "National security must be above politics. In a democracy, transparency in government has to be honored and protected. To classify information for reasons other than the safety and security of the United States and its interests is a violation of these principles. It is for this reason that we will continue to press for the release of the article without the material deleted." To me, that really showed how the White House and the intelligence community, the military-industrial complex, however you want to put it, they have a direct influence over what our free press can and cannot print. I think Julian Assange and other whistleblowers have shown this exact problem. We really don't have the transparent media that we like to believe. At one point, I really did think that whatever you could really print whatever you wanted to in the United States because we had this free press enshrined. But it seems that national security really does pose a real threat to democracy, as history has told us. So kind of wanted to end it a little bit on a somber note, because you should be skeptical and I think absolutely curious about this subject, because boy, oh boy, does it really seem like something's going on right now. And I'm just very excited to cover this. Unfortunately, I don't have much else to say in terms of monumental news, but I think it's pretty interesting. We're living in a world where there's a lot of information and we really have to be good at sifting through what we know. But even at the top surface level, seems interesting. Like we're getting more official public reports, NASA, Canada, just more people are openly engaging with this subject. But behind the scenes, that picture appears to be very opaque indeed. So on that note, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, however long it is until I post the next one, and hopefully we get a little bit more idea about what's really going on at the center of this onion. All right, take it easy.